Hello there, listeners. My name's Suzi Nou and welcome to the Australian Anaesthesia podcast. Thank you for listening. In this episode, we are talking about one of my favourite topics, and that is leadership. I attended a leadership workshop early in my career, and I recall the facilitator saying that once you've finished your training, whether it be in anaesthesia or another area completely outside of medicine, then most of your career development will be made in the area of leadership. And when I reflect on my career, I can say that's definitely been the case. Yes, anaesthetic techniques have changed over time. I've had to learn how to use a video laryngoscope and Sagamadex, and I haven't seen a fast-track LMA since, I don't know, do they still even make them? But one thing that I continue to think and talk about is leadership. And that is definitely a passion that I share with our guest today, Dr Mark Priestley. Before I introduce him, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about my latest baby. It's been growing for a while, but it's now gaining momentum, and it's also definitely taking a lot of my time. It's been another great avenue for me and others to discuss leadership, and I think that's the secret sauce to becoming a better leader and a better anaesthetist as well. It's learning how to reflect, how to seek and receive feedback, how to surround yourself with the right people so that you have the conversations that encourage you to reflect and to grow. So far, and it's only March, we've had 2 online gatherings this year. I say gatherings because they're more like what we're calling book clubs. So the first session was led by Dr. Tanya Farrell, President of SPANZA, which is the Society for Paediatric Anaesthesia in New Zealand and Australia. She's another one of the co-founders, and she shared some resources, some ideas, and the topic was leadership versus management. And then we came together to discuss them like you do in a book club. I remember on the night having this great conversation about formal leadership, you know, a role that comes with a title like president, head of department, versus informal leadership roles, which is someone who is leading change without necessarily having a title to do so, and how the options, resources, limitations, restrictions might differ between those 2 roles. I hosted the next book club event, which was on the Herman brain thinking model. Think of it like the Myers-Briggs personality framework, you know, the one that gives you 16 possibilities like ENFJ and so on, but for people with a really short attention span because there's only 4 quadrants to think about. Again, I really enjoyed hosting this session. I really get a kick out of seeing people figuring this sort of stuff out. I also like that these groups work like a peer group. We're bringing together anaesthetists with a growth mindset and sharing ideas that can contribute to our own and each other's growth. It's really great to see. So if you want to know more, the program is called WELI, and it stands for the Women's Empowerment and Leadership Initiative. WELI is open for men and women. We want men to get involved as advisors, women, gender diverse folks. You can apply to be a protege, or we get you involved as an advisor. What are these terms that I mentioned? Well, I think that's one of the main strengths of the WELI program. The team, again led by Dr. Farrell, go to great lengths to match a protege who is an up-and-coming woman, gender-diverse leader in anaesthesia or pain medicine with an advisor. And the advisor acts as their coach, mentor, even sponsor. Because what I found when I was president of the ASA is I'd often attend meetings and be the only woman in the room. Don't get me started on being the only Asian, public high school educated, yada, yada, yada. And I wanted to see, in fact, we are seeing more women in leadership roles. The current president of the ASA is a woman. The ASA board is 50-50. And it doesn't happen by accident or by attending leadership courses. It also takes a bit of a network. So with the Australian New Zealand chapter of WELI, we've got senior people from the college, ASA, SPANZA involved. So it means we can reach out to a lot of people. And the other great thing is that we didn't come up with this program ourselves. Full credit to our colleagues in the US who developed it, evaluated it, and kindly let us form our own local chapter. Not only that, but they've very kindly encouraged us to tap into their network over in the United States for more leadership events, more speaking opportunities. So who knows where this will go. So with that, I want to introduce Dr. Mark Priestley, who at the time we recorded this conversation was head of department at Westmead Hospital, one of the biggest teaching hospitals in Sydney, if not the country. As you'll hear, he's an ASMOF councillor, ANZCA councillor, and chair of the Leadership and Management Special Interest Group. He's led his department and also been really vocal on behalf of ASMOF about the pretty average wage conditions in New South Wales for public specialists. Essentially, he's someone well placed to go deep into this conversation, which I'm immensely thankful for. It's pretty special and I hope you enjoy it. One of the things I've been really enjoying exploring on the podcast lately is leadership. And I know you are both a leader in anaesthesia in Australia and also have an interest in leadership. So I'm really glad that we are actually having a whole session to chat about this.
My passion.
When did you realise? When did you think it was your passion?
It's one of those things that I think crept up on me. And in fact, I think I can blame you because about 5 years ago, someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, would you like to join the Leadership Special Interest Group for the College and ASA, NZSA? And it felt like something where I thought I'd had a couple of leadership roles and was in a head of department role, and I thought I'd go in and learn something. I very quickly realised that actually everybody's learning something. It's an area that is a long way ahead outside medicine, but within medicine, we're sort of feeling our way. No one ever gets really taught how to do it properly. Everyone's in roles that are quite important in terms of leadership. But as soon as you start to look outside the medical literature, there's actually quite a lot out there that can help us. And so that got me started. And so that's probably the point at which it reached consciousness that this was a real thing.
So you were already an established leader, and I'll come back to that section of your career, if you like, in a bit. When you realised that leadership and learning leadership was a thing, what did you do from there? Did you attend courses? What resources did you tap into? Where did your education journey go from there?
Yeah, so I started looking at courses both locally and overseas, and in actual fact there is already quite a lot on offer. My local health district has courses for medical managers. The College of Medical Administrator has leadership courses. There are some quite well-known courses overseas. Unfortunately, at the time for me, especially with COVID, but even after COVID, getting to a 1-2 week immersion overseas leadership course hasn't proved to be realistic. But I started with the AFRACMA, that's the affiliated RACMA, the Royal College of Medical Administrators course. And that certainly was very helpful as a head of department because it gave some insights on things like people management and finance. And it aligned with a lot of the books on leadership. I'm one of these people who, rather than spend $100,000 on an MBA, would like to read the book, The 30-Day MBA, which costs about $20. And it certainly gives you a little bit of insight on what you think they might teach you. So the RACMA course was, I think, very helpful. Mm. But then it quickly morphed into actually feeling like learning on the job was as good as reading a book. And it was really just about trying to look up stuff, a little bit like when you're trying to sit the fellowship exam. You know, you can learn about everything in the curriculum, or you can actually go to work and do it. And then when you do it, you read up about it afterwards, and then it sticks a bit better. So when you would read on leadership titles like how to deal with a dysfunctional team or how to recruit the best team, and in actual fact, you try and work with the best team in the first place, and then you go to the book and say, okay, what could we do differently? And then there's a lot of literature available.
Yeah, that's true, because often we don't get to choose the teams that we work with. Sometimes they're already preordained.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the other thing, is that a lot of the literature in the non-medical literature deals with an ideal corporate world where you've got a lot of agency about who you can hire and fire. In the medical workplace, you're sort of dealt a deck of cards and you just got to make the most of it, really. And you also got to realise that everyone else in that system is just trying to do their best with often not enough resources. And so it's just making the best of the situation around you, whatever it is.
You mentioned that the AFRACMA you thought was particularly useful for you as a head of department. Would you also recommend it for people who are in leadership roles who are not in head of department roles or not aspiring to become heads of departments?
Oh, absolutely. And mainly because it gives you an insight into a whole world that you otherwise don't get any exposure to, whether it's finance and health informatics, recruitment, budgeting, It does include things around how to deal with difficult people, how to have difficult conversations. It touches on how to be a leader in any field, whether it's leading a theatre team, leading a team at your local surf club, whatever. I thought it was very good value.
And just tell us a little bit about the logistics of what's involved for people who might be interested or contemplating taking that on.
Yeah, so my understanding pre-COVID is it used to be a full face-to-face immersion type thing. It's pretty much morphed into an online thing, which I guess is a little bit of a shame in terms of the networking, but you do still get to interact with the other people who join up, and they're cohorts of a dozen or so people who are just doctors, all specialties all over Australia and New Zealand. And it's roughly a half day a fortnight for half a year. The homework and the pre-reading is very doable for a busy person, and they may have a long day at the start and at the end, soft skill type assignments, and overall it's not hard yakka. And the other good thing about it is that at the end of it, if you wish to, you can then sign up for membership as an affiliate of the college, and that gives you access to webinars and a whole stack of other resources, which I use all the time. You just tune into a webinar on all sorts of leadership issues now. It's fantastic.
That's a good plug for it. It definitely piqued my interest, so you never know. Might add it on my list of things to do.
You might have shot past it, I'd say, Susie.
Thanks, Mark. I wanted to go back to your career, if that's okay. You mentioned that you were already a head of department at that time. What was it like getting into that role?
I was a supervisor of training for a big hospital, Westmead in Western Sydney, for about 20 years, and I went on long service leave for 6 months, went overseas, took the kids out of school, put them in school in Paris, and went and drank wine. And while I was over there, the head of department, who'd been head of department for 25 years, announced his retirement. And a couple of people rang me up and asked me if I would be interested. And I had not really seriously considered it up to that point, but I then had quite a bit of time to have a bit of a think about it. And I guess it was about saying to myself, well, I'd like to see the department continue to succeed, and I could envisage what success might look like for the sake of someone wanting to have a crack at leading people along a certain path. And so by the time I came back to Australia, I was actually quite highly motivated. And then I got not much of a handover. It was like, here's the keys to the office, and there was a lot in the stuff.
Sounds about typical.
There was a lot of stuff in the office that had a lot of dust on it, so that sort of had to go. But then that's when it really kicked in that, what is actually, a head of department role and a leadership role. And I was very fortunate to have some really good people around me in that department, very talented people who were willing to help. And I was able to delegate a lot of very, very time-consuming and difficult things. And so it sort of took off from there.
I did a podcast recently with David Tian, who was one of, I don't know if he still is, one of your registrars. So he talked very fondly about what a good department that is. And thanks to the department for supporting him in his trip to Antarctica. So it sounds like you're building a really good department there.
He was a good example of how if you just give a good person a little bit of slack to do what they want, I think we will all get so much out of his experience there. It's not just his own personal experience, but what he brings back to the medical and the anaesthetic community is invaluable.
I remember being a trainee, and I used to think, and I still do think, heads of departments are incredibly important people, but I used to think that was the peak, that was the pinnacle of your anaesthetic career. And I've been a head of department myself, and I've seen what it's like on the other side. And I couldn't see that as a trainee necessarily. So can you paint us a picture or give us some insights into what your role involves that we don't necessarily see when we're coming through as trainees or junior consultants?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I had the same view as a head of department for most of my working career. It was something I knew I would never do. And it was largely because I think the undergraduate or the outside view of it is very much as a manager, right, and not as a leader. And people often think the two are completely separate, and they would love to be a leader, but they would hate to be a manager. And in actual fact, all of those roles are both combined. And the good heads of department, or the lucky heads of department, are the ones who can do both or can quarantine the time to make changes and actually move people in a direction and not get sucked into the day-to-day management, which is basically making what you're doing work well, which is very important as well. Management is a very important part of the head of department role or any leadership role. But if that's the only thing you do, it can very easily turn into Groundhog Day and be quite soul-destroying. And it's often the thing that other people see, the trainees see, just the day-to-day slog, the rosters, the recruitment, the performance reviews, the finance team. Someone once a day would say to me, I don't know how you do it. And if that's all there was, I wouldn't be doing it myself. You've got to look at the other stuff and says, okay, how can we do something different and be different in 1, 2 or 5 years' time? And even though you may not succeed, aiming for something often makes the whole thing worth it.
I wanted to now just segue into your role in ASMOF, because I don't think people necessarily understand what ASMOF is, what's its relationship with the AMA, and you've been very vocal recently, which is great. Can you give us a bit of a background about ASMOF and how you found yourself entering that leadership role?
So ASMOF is the Australian Salaried Medical Officers Federation. And as a federation, each state has got its own branch, which tends to deal, there are federal issues, but often most of the union-related issues are state-related issues. And I have to say, for a long time, I was not a member. And even when I became a member, I was quite dormant. In the last sort of 10 years in particular, New South Wales has really started to lag quite a long way behind in terms of the other states, in terms of the conditions and entitlements for staff specialists. And being head of a very prominently high staff specialist-based department, this really mattered to me. And we found, particularly coming out of COVID, it was very difficult to attract people to become staff specialists at what I would consider one of the big premier teaching hospitals in New South Wales. And I know from my colleagues around Sydney that it was the same problem. And I just thought, we can't leave it like this. And so it's not for me. You know, I don't have that long left to be on the award, but what I would love to see is if we could change the award in New South Wales in a way that made it attractive for new graduates in anaesthesia or any other specialty. If I look at how it works in most other states, and Victoria is a good example, Queensland a good example, you know, the big teaching hospitals are primarily staff specialist based. It means that everyone lives in the space. There's no downside to VMOs. In fact, they're the same people. It's the same anaesthetist, the same surgeon. It's just that if you can get someone who's a very high fraction in one place with some non-clinical time set aside to attend meetings, just integrate with other specialties, it sort of becomes a little bit of the backbone of the place if you can do it. I would love to see the conditions work better. So, I mean, my argument about the union is that unions thrive when the corporation or the organisational leadership is failing. And I think that's what's happening in New South Wales.
And so you were there as a dormant member, as you describe yourself, and you had, I think, a very clear vision of what needed to be done or what needs to be done. It's still ongoing, and a platform or a mechanism to hopefully affect some of that change. How did you go from being dormant member to now councillor and at times spokesperson for the organisation?
Yeah, so councillor is one of those things where every 3 years they put out expressions of interest and any member of the union can put their hand up. I think that the last time this came up, huge swathes of the membership felt that it was time for a bit of a change in leadership, and so quite a lot of people put their hand up. I was one of many, and it was really just to, I guess, get a group of highly motivated people to see change in the award system in New South Wales. And you get voted in, so rightly or wrongly I got voted in. There's about, I think, 25 or more counsellors, including the doctors in training. About almost half of them are doctors in training.
Leading on from what you've just described, I know some people have expressed the view they don't like being in leadership, or they're worried about entering into leadership positions, especially medico-political ones, because they're worried about, you know, you stick your head above the parapet, it's going to get shot down. And particularly when it comes to media, you know, say something on media or social media, people are going to come and attack you. Did you entertain any of those thoughts? Have you had any of those challenges? And if you did, how did you overcome them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been very lucky with social media in the sense that I haven't had a lot of negative pushback, and I'm so useless with it that often if they say something bad, I probably didn't see it. And that's part of the answer with social media. I think you have to learn to ignore both the good and the bad. If you think the good stuff means they're talking about you, then you have to accept that maybe the bad stuff means they're talking about you, and sometimes you're better off ignoring the commentary, full stop. But it certainly was a worry, given that there are codes of conduct about what you can say in the media for an employee of New South Wales Health, that you do need to be, I guess, aware of exactly what you can and can't say. There are roles in which you can speak up. So I was the chair of the Medical Staff Council at Westmead for 3 years, largely through the COVID years, and there were conditions under which I was able to speak to the media. But generally speaking, the safest way is to be upfront with everybody who you think might be a stakeholder. So if you're going to say something about your employer, then go and have a chat to your employer and say, look, I'm about to be interviewed by the ABC or the Sydney Morning Herald, and here's what I'm going to say. And if they have got a problem with it, they can tell you beforehand rather than them find out and get ambushed. And often they are more than happy with that, and they will say, okay, thanks for the heads up. You go for it, depending on exactly what it is you're going to say. Being a counsellor for the union is quite different. I don't speak on behalf of my position at the hospital. I am as a counsellor for ASMOF New South Wales. And once again, that means that as long as my comments are in that context and not as an anaesthetist at Westmead, then I have certain protections, as it were. But it's about being diplomatic with everybody.
You describe well exactly the diplomatic path you often have to weave, and also most people like knowing about things in advance. I was listening to a leadership and management podcast, and they were talking about how Taylor Swift apparently does this very well. She's often announcing to her fans what she's about to do and what she's thinking before she goes out and launches it and changes tack with her career. The other person also is Trump, apparently.
But they've written a book about Taylor Swift's leadership and management style, which I haven't read, but I would fully believe that there would be elements that we could all learn from. And even Trump, I'm often asked, what does leadership mean? What's the definition of leadership? And if you summarise, there are currently 60,000 books on Amazon on leadership, right? So you can pick and choose just about any definition you like. But the common ground is that it is the ability or the capacity to influence others to achieve a certain goal. Now, good leadership just means that your influence is effective and the goal is a good goal, right? But if you take the word good out of it, then Donald Trump is a very effective leader. Adolf Hitler was a very effective leader. And in terms of efficacy, Trump does a lot of things that we could all learn from. And I won't go into them. I'm not going to promote them. But certainly he is a very effective influencer.
That's true. I want to momentarily ask you to, I suppose, adopt a bit of a leadership framework that I have, and then maybe we'll go through it. So if I had to teach leadership to people, in my world, there are 4 basic skills or 4 basic parts of the curriculum, if you like. So the first one is you need to get to know yourself, because if you don't know yourself, you can't manage yourself. You can't manage yourself, you can't manage others. So that's the internal bit. Then the second part is you then, once you know yourself, you look at how you communicate, how you negotiate. So that's that sort of one-on-one, one-on-small group kind of leadership, influence, persuasion. And then from there, you start thinking about the bigger context. So the political context in which you are leading, the strategic thinking, the finances, the clarity of vision and goal setting, those sorts of things. I pause at vision and goal setting because that's sort of creeping in all the way. As you're getting to know yourself, you realise what's important to you, what your vision is, what your strategy might be, those sorts of things. The concentric circles are getting larger, if you like. And then the final one is, I think most leaders get to that point, is you can only affect change for so much, but it's what you leave for the next generation. So you learn to coach, you learn to mentor. And in that process, you get to know yourself more, which keeps you going around in this continuous leadership cycle. So if I had to design a curriculum, that's how it would look. So first I want to ask you, what would you include in that, or what have I missed out?
Well, Not a lot. It resonates with me. I have tended to, without writing it all down, reading at least, 100 of those 60,000 books, tried to pick up little bits. And the structure that you've used reminds me very much of a famous book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it starts with yourself first, and it starts with who you are and your values and how you communicate, etc. And then it moves on in the second half with other people, and then tying it all up at the end. Rather than overcomplicate it, I think those 4 things, if we were to do them properly, would be, within it, there is so much, right? If you take the part where you now want to set a vision, that's actually a lot more easily said than done.
Oh, absolutely.
Because inside that is what's your strategy. There's all about risk management. You can go to workshops that go for days just on decision making, right? Just how to make a decision. And all of that ties into getting from what's an embryonic thought in your head about a vision through to influencing others and, bringing people along. So there's a lot inside each of those 4 things.
Yeah.
But I think what's important is you have to do them in that order, because if you don't know yourself, it's actually many books now, when you talk about leadership, will ask you to reflect on your values. Sometimes they will give you a page of 100 words that could be one of your values. And you read the page and you think, well, they're all my values, right? Integrity and honesty and love and everything, they're all my values, right? Family, it goes on and on. Well, actually, if you don't prioritise, then you can't do it all and you can't be everything for everyone. So you do have to set some priorities. And when you sit and look at the page for long enough, 3 or 4 of those words will actually hit you harder than the other ones and resonate more strongly. And that's when you've got to sit down and say, okay, well, if that's me, how do I then use and make the most of those values to influence others or to set a vision and a strategy? So you've got to do it in that order.
That's great. Thank you for adopting this model that's just been planted on you live and on the spot.
Well, we've got to work out what to do next, and this is a big part of it. How are we going to teach everyone else, Susie?
Well, that's what I wanted to just do, a little bit of a deeper dive into those 4 sections. And I've tried to keep it simple. Ideally, it's 3 sections because our brain works better in 3s apparently, but I haven't been able to reduce it. I wanted to pick your brains in terms of what you think might have been really effective for you or what you might encourage other people to consider within each of those. What tools or strategies? So going for the first one, getting to know yourself. What sort of work have you done there that you've really enjoyed or found useful?
So one thing that I found very useful was it's a little bit about finding out what the most important values are to yourself. It is about shutting out the noise from other people and other people's values, and that can be very easy when you're in a role where there are expectations of you from above or from your colleagues or from other stakeholders to be, I call it ratcheting on the moral compass, right? You've got to get the hammer and nail it down so that that's where you stay, because all your other decisions after that, there will be conflicting priorities. Your colleagues and staff and trainees will want one thing, the hospital will want another. Whenever it was clinically related within my department, the bit that was ratcheted down was, I would say, what would I want for my mother if she's a patient, right? Because ultimately, if I could see the patient as a relative or a friend of mine as being the one who had to get the most out of this decision, it usually made answering some of those conflicts a lot easier. But you can only do that if you know what your values are first. Perhaps the most important thing I've tried to work on for 30 years, 20 as a supervisor of training and 10 as a head of department, is communication. I've been to a lot of workshops and read a lot of books. And now I run workshops myself on how to have a difficult conversation. And every time I run that workshop, I reread everything and I learn something new. And I get more out of it every single time. And so that's something that I work on for myself, but also now I give back to try and help other people, because if you can get the tough conversations right, then your ability to influence other people goes up enormously.
Oh, I 100% agree. And I know a lot of people are really interested in that particular area, whether you're in a leadership role formally or just from your day-to-day work, is how to have those difficult conversations. Tell me more about this course. This sounds amazing.
I put it together from a range of resources, but there was one in particular when I did the ANZCA Educators course about 15 years ago. It was recommended by Maurice Hennessy. It's a book called Crucial Conversations.
Yes.
And it's an absolute cracking book. And it helps you in a difficult conversation, whether you're trying to deal with recalcitrant teenagers or fix your marriage or work with a boss who's a bully. Like, it actually goes through some fairly tough sort of scenarios. And I put together what I thought was the 5 most important things out of it and ran it for my department who liked it, and then I ran it for some colleagues in the hospital who liked it. And then the last couple of years I've been doing it at the Combined Special Interest Group meeting, and people keep liking it because now I keep getting invited further afield. I'm doing it at the Auckland ASM, and really it's just those principles, but set to life by an anaesthetist to anaesthetists. And so the scenarios are all very relevant there. I'm a supervisor of training with a difficult trainee or a difficult discussion with a trainer who's a bit fragile, and all these scenarios. And so it's sort of very relevant for a lot of people. But I have to tell people up front, I have no specialist qualifications. I don't have a degree in psychology or communication, but it does come from a long background of trying to get better in this space.
And that's a lot of it, isn't it? You learn on the job, but it's also a great deal of reflection that goes into it that makes you, I think, a better learner whilst you're learning on the job. I love that book. I think my first takeaway was that the important thing about a crucial conversation is knowing when you're having one.
Correct. Correct.
They sneak up on you.
And whether to have one at all, right?
Exactly.
So, sometimes, and it comes down to how are you going to feel about not having the conversation? And usually we know what that feels like because we've been afraid to have it for years. But if it's something trivial, don't feel like you've got to blow up the world just because your partner squeezes the toothpaste at the wrong end or something. You've got to pick your battles.
Oh, in this age of rage and social media, that is such a timely message. And I remember reading the book and thinking, this would be great as a face-to-face course and going through it. So I love that you've done that. And I want to know, are you running it at CombiSig? Because I think I'm going to go there and I really want to do this course.
So I haven't got as far ahead as CombiSig. The answer is if they invite me, I nearly always say yes if I'm available. But yeah, almost certainly.
We might have to talk offline about whether you might be interested in running one for the ASA Council Development Day.
Oh, no problem. And in fact, where it's starting to head now, I did one for the ASMOF staff. These are not medical officers. They are union officers, and they loved it. And in fact, I do the workshop by them bringing their hardest, most difficult conversation. And some of the ones that they brought to the table just blew me away. And yet we were still able to go through the principles of it.
That's good. I love that. Diving into the third part, that's the all-encompassing, the big concentric circle. Now that you've got some skills in negotiation, handling difficult conversations, how do you start putting it together? You're learning about finances, governance, strategic thinking, navigating the political climate that you're in. It's a big, messy world out there. How do you navigate it?
So the first thing I've learned is some of the hardest parts are focusing. So when they talk about strategy, the big decisions are not what you're going to do, but what you're not going to do. Like deliberately, actively decide to put on a back burner, because the common mistake is to try too much, and it all looks good on paper, but generally that's a recipe for failure. And so if you just try the 2 or 3 things that are most important to you, that's the first thing. The only other, I guess, I feel like the most important thing is get into it and then learn on the run rather than hope that the perfection of reading every book and learning every lesson first. And there's a book by, what's her name, Hermione Ibarra. I can't remember the name of the book, but basically it's about doing exactly that. Just get into it by doing it and learning the lessons on the way. And I think that's where I've found that I've been most effective. I would write reams and reams of pages on strategy and what I'm going to do next, and pages of planning. And what did Eisenhower say? The strategy falls apart as soon as the first shot's fired or something. You just gotta, as soon as you meet contact with the enemy, it's all over.
I'm reading Chris, I don't know if you've heard of Chris Voss, FBI hostage negotiator.
Oh, yeah.
Who's written, what's the book called? Never Split the Difference.
Oh, yes. Now, that's on my reading because I've heard snippets of it and I'd love to read the whole thing.
I'm midway through it at the moment, but it's funny because my husband got me onto it, and so he's a few chapters ahead of me, and every now and again we'll just come home and one of us will launch into one of the exercises. We're just kind of practicing with each other. But it really brought home to me that you get better at negotiating by negotiating.
Correct.
You can't just read it. It's not something that just comes to you out of a textbook.
Correct.
The last one is then giving back and helping shape and lead and mentor the next generation. You're chair of the Leadership and Management Special Interest Group, which I think is hopefully a great avenue for that for future anaesthetic leaders. Have you got any thoughts or any tips there that you found really useful?
Yeah, two things. So one, the concept of coaching is now quite well developed, and I actually decided, as I'm toying with stepping down as the head of department, and I want to give back in some way. And I actually started a proper coaching course with the Australian Institute of Professional Coaches because it felt like that's what I was doing anyway with some of my junior colleagues. And I thought perhaps I should learn some rules around how to do it properly. But I think coaching and mentoring is a really important way once you've been in a leadership role for a little while. And it doesn't have to be at the end of your career. I think you can be thinking about it as soon as you've been in a role for long enough to think that actually, if it feels like it's plateauing for you, it probably means it's time to start giving back to other people and thinking about succession planning. The other area that I think is structured networking and education for heads of department. And so last year we started an inaugural Heads of Department Networking Day. It was a satellite meeting for the combined special interest group meeting in Sydney. It was very well attended and very well received. We couldn't run it again this year for a variety of reasons, basically because the education calendar is so full that trying not to clash with something was a bit tricky. But we are going to run a half day at the Auckland ASM, probably a half day at the ASA NSC in the Hunter Valley. And then the question then will be whether we go back to a full standalone day that allows heads of department to come together, talk to each other. I call it like trial vivas for heads of department. You all sit in a room and you get a scenario and you've got to thrash out how to deal with a CEO who's a bully or to put up a business case for something, and people got a lot out of it. And there's so much talent, some of the senior heads of department around the country, around Australia and New Zealand, there's so much on offer people could give back, and I think I'd love to see the junior heads of department benefit from that.
Oh, I love that. I had that vision or idea. We tried to get it off the ground maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. It was called 4D, as in it's the fourth dimension, but it stood for Directors of Departments Development Day.
Yes, similar idea. I've called mine H2H, head to head.
Nice.
Hopefully next year and beyond it'll be on as a regular thing.
Fantastic. Have you ever been the recipient of coaching yourself?
No, I haven't, and certainly not directly or formally. I've certainly had a lot of role models that, I found very helpful that I looked up to. It's something that I guess my generation, I'm not sure about others, but it wasn't really a thing. I think we are better at it now. We understand the concept. And the same with mentoring. I think we're much better at the concept of it now, and it's something that I'd like to see expanded a little bit, whether it's my department or within the anaesthesia specialty alone. I think it's something we could do a lot better. There's this huge gap between training and then the emerging leadership course, the college ASM, and then there's this yawning gap where people don't really get any mentoring or coaching in this sort of area until someone taps you on the shoulder and says, can you be the head of department or some other leadership role? So I think there's room for improvement there.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm so excited. This is where you want to be heading with things. Have you got anything else on the horizon or any ideas that you're brewing on in terms of leadership and anaesthesia?
I intend to step down as head of department and I'm too young to retire. So I've put my hand up and got a spot on the council for ANZCA.
Oh, congratulations.
And that's a whole other piece of work, which I feel like, I just want to try and help and contribute and be part of the different voices to sort of lead the college, and not just the college, because its relationship with the ASA, with government, with NZSA is probably more important than ever. I just got myself a gig as the ANZCA Council representative on the ASA PIAC.
Oh, good.
The professional issues for the ASA. And I think that's a fantastic thing, because even just in the one meeting I've been to, it's clear that there's a lot of resonance in terms of the issues to be discussed and try and help move forward our specialty in what I think is very challenging times.
Absolutely.
We've got a lot of threats as well as a lot of opportunities, so it'd be good to be part of that.
Oh, that's great. It's so true that our specialty in Australia is stronger when the college and the ASA work together so well.
Absolutely, and we need that more than ever.
Look, it's been a fantastic chat. I could chat, I think, with you for a very long time about all things leadership. I feel like we've just barely scraped the surface.
I know. Is
there anything else that you would like to mention at all?
As I said, I've loved the podcast and I was privileged to be asked, and I look forward to seeing you in Canberra very soon.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you too. Thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
Thanks a lot, Susie.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I'm really grateful to Mark. How great was he in handling the framework that I threw at him on the spot? Which, by the way, is a framework we've adopted for the book club sessions at our Australian and New Zealand chapter of WELI. You might have picked up during the conversation that Mark and I caught up again after this podcast was recorded in Canberra. That was on a panel that he hosted during the ASA's National Scientific Congress last year. So if you want to hear more from us, then that video will be available on the website later in the year, I believe around about August. I've put a link to the NSC videos in the show notes, so you'll find it there when the time comes. Also, if you want to hear more about WELI, then naturally I've recorded a podcast about it. I hope you do want to have a listen and find out more. That episode is number 83, and I chat with Professor Nina Deutsch and Associate Professor Larry Schwartz, two of the original co-founders of WELI in the US. I really like how Mark emphasised at the end of our chat the importance of working together, not just as colleagues, but also at higher levels. So the importance of the ASA, ANZCA and AMA all working together. I should perhaps do a podcast one day on the different ways the ASA and the AMA protect you in the workplace, as this is something I get asked quite a lot, and the idea of going through Fair Work Commission, etc. can be really daunting. If you haven't heard me mention it before, then I encourage you, particularly in this political climate, to be a member of all three organisations. They cover different things and they work synergistically really well together, so it's good to show your support. Speaking of three organisations, but three different ones, the ASA, ANZCA and the New Zealand Society of Anaesthetists come together as the parent organisations of the ACE events, ACE standing for Anaesthesia Continuing Education. It has its own website, but this covers basically all the special interest groups and their events, or SIGs, SIGs. So the Airway SIG, the Wellbeing SIG, the Leadership and Management SIG, which Mark is a chair of, these are all supported by the tripartite arrangement of the parent bodies, including the events that they hold. It may not always, in fact, it rarely looks that way, I think, but all three organisations support the SIGs behind the scenes, which means putting in resources and money. So one organisation may host the secretariat and be sending out all the emails and all your correspondence, but it's really with the support of the other organisations in this tripartite arrangement. I'm sure all three organisations offer leadership opportunities, but the ones I know most about are those that are offered by the ASA. And there are some more leadership opportunities in the pipeline. So it looks like the 4D event is going to be happening again this year. That's the Directors of Departments Development Day, which I mentioned in the podcast. As the name suggests, that event is for heads of departments. In the past, it included those from public hospitals as well as the chairs of MAC groups in private hospitals. It's a day to develop your leadership skills, broaden your network with other department leads. I know as heads of department, you get involved in discussions which may test your negotiation skills, perhaps your conflict resolution skills. So this is a good day to consider those sorts of topics and learn from others. At the other end of the career spectrum, the ASA has partnered with Baster's Academy for Health Leadership, which is closely associated with the Melbourne Business School and the University of Melbourne's Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences. They offer a number of courses, and the ASA is offering some scholarships to attend one of their leadership programs. You do need to be demonstrating some leadership skills and potential and be on an ASA committee. And the goal of that is that we want you to develop your leadership skills and perhaps to prepare you for holding a significant leadership role within the ASA. Maybe you're going to be our next president or maybe our next podcast host. That'd be great. In the meantime, I'm not going anywhere soon. I hope you're not either, except perhaps to join me and the wonderful proteges and advisors and team at WELI. Of course, I put links to everything in the show notes. And if you want to get in touch with me about anything, then podcast@asa.org.au is the best email to reach me on. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay well, and keep kicking those goals.